People have spent centuries dragging sonar equipment across the ocean floor, convinced they are one scan away from discovering a sunken super-civilization. Enthusiasts regularly point to natural geological formations, like the underwater limestone blocks of the Bimini Road, or the concentric rings of the Rishat structure in Mauritania, as absolute proof of a lost city. But modern archaeology operates on stratigraphy, the study of layered soils and human occupational debris. If a massive, globe-spanning empire existed, it would leave an indelible footprint of pottery, weapons, and structural foundations. Despite high-resolution mapping of the Atlantic, we have found zero physical trace of a sunken continent. The search for physical ruins comes up empty, because Atlantis was never a real geographical location. The story didn't start at the bottom of the sea. It started on a philosopher's desk. Every single claim about Atlantis traces back to exactly one primary source, the Athenian philosopher Plato. He introduced the story in two dialogues, the Timaeus and the unfinished Critias, written in the mid-4th century BCE. Before these texts, there is absolute silence in the historical record. Plato was not writing an ethnographic history or a geographical record. He was crafting a complex philosophical drama. He wanted a practical way to demonstrate how his theoretical ideal city-state would perform in a real-world geopolitical struggle. To do this, he set up a binary conflict. On one side, he placed an idealized ancient Athens, an austere, land-based power governed by selfless philosopher kings. On the other side, he created Atlantis, a hyper-wealthy, technologically sophisticated, and highly aggressive naval empire driven by avarice. The story ends with the catastrophic destruction of the island. This wasn't a random geological event. Plato explicitly framed the sinking as divine retribution from the gods, a direct punishment for the empire's imperial hubris and unquenchable greed. Trying to read this political thriller as an actual map to a submerged city is a profound category error. Doing so erases Plato's actual intent, a stark warning to his own contemporaries about the dangers of imperial overreach. Even though the narrative is fiction, some researchers argue that Plato built his story using distorted cultural memories of very real geological traumas. This is known as the memory hypothesis. One common theory points to the Minoans, a wealthy maritime culture in the Aegean. Around 1600 BCE, the nearby volcano of Thera erupted with devastating force, triggering massive tsunamis that decimated Minoan coastal settlements. Another theory looks deeper into the past, to an event called Meltwater Pulse 1b. Roughly 11,500 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, massive continental ice sheets rapidly collapsed. This caused a sudden, violent spike in global sea levels, permanently flooding vast stretches of inhabited coastlines. But these factual geological events clash directly with the specifics of Plato's text. Plato dates the destruction of Atlantis to 9600 BCE. He also explicitly describes a civilization wielding advanced bronze and iron metallurgy, massive agricultural infrastructure, and fielding thousands of naval ships. Human societies in 9600 BCE were universally transitioning into early hunter-gatherer and nascent agricultural phases. The archaeological record from this specific period is completely devoid of industrialized metallurgy or monumental urban centers. A highly organized Bronze Age naval empire simply could not exist in the 10th millennium BCE. Those ancient, violent floods certainly traumatized early human populations, leaving a lasting mark on collective memory and inspiring global deluge myths. But a shared memory of rising water does not legitimize the existence of a high-tech Atlantean superstate. The leap from a philosophical allegory to an alternative history happened in 1882. An American politician named Ignatius Donnelly published a book that treated Plato's text as absolute, literal historical truth. Donnelly championed a concept called hyperdiffusionism. He argued that ancient cultures did not develop independently, and that all known civilizations, from the Egyptians to the Maya, were actually just descendants of refugees from Atlantis. In the 20th century, occult figures took this even further. The sleeping prophet Edgar Cayce introduced the idea that Atlanteans possessed highly advanced crystal-based technology, lasers, and flying machines, injecting pure science fiction into the ancient Greek parable. Today, modern alternative historians rely heavily on a logical fallacy called the argument from ignorance. When they find gaps in the historical record, they present that exact lack of evidence as proof that an invisible, highly advanced mother culture must have been there. This image shows an archaeological trench with distinct, labeled occupational soil layers, demonstrating the rigorous process of stratigraphy. True archaeology relies on this kind of positive evidence. If a global pre-Ice Age civilization existed, we would find their synthetic materials, complex alloys, and widespread agricultural markers buried in these Pleistocene geological strata. We find absolutely none of it. The modern pseudo-archaeological version of Atlantis is a fabricated narrative. By insisting that early humans couldn't possibly build pyramids or complex structures without the help of an advanced super race, this theory deliberately strips ancient indigenous cultures of the credit for their own independent technological and agricultural ingenuity. If the physical evidence is zero, and the academic origin is undeniably fictional, why do human beings desperately need Atlantis to be real? The answer isn't sitting at the bottom of the ocean. It's in our own psychology. The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung pointed out that myths are symbolic expressions of the human psyche. Atlantis acts as a perfect archetype of the Golden Age. It represents a profound, universal desire to return to a state of primal innocence, harmony, and perfection. We live in a fast-paced, highly technological world that often generates feelings of spiritual fragmentation and alienation. Believing in Atlantis provides a kind of soul home, a comforting idea that humanity once possessed deep, ancient wisdom that we simply misplaced. The story of Atlantis is also a story about the apocalypse. Throughout the last century, humanity has lived under the shadow of global annihilation, from nuclear war to catastrophic climate change. We take these intense, modern existential anxieties and project them backward onto the distant past. Paradoxically, looking at a destroyed ancient civilization offers a strange sense of comfort. If a society as great as Atlantis fell, and humanity still survived to rebuild, it implies that our own impending modern collapse might not be the end of the species. It makes survival feel possible. Human brains are neurologically hardwired for pattern recognition. Faced with the vast, chaotic, and often tedious reality of slow historical evolution, our minds frequently rebel. We naturally prefer a neat, thrilling story about a cosmic super-civilization over the meticulous, unglamorous study of shifting pottery styles. Atlantis is the ultimate mirror. It is not a sunken continent waiting to be discovered by a submarine. It is a 2,400-year-old fictional warning about the dangers of arrogance and greed. And yet, era after era, humanity has relentlessly taken that warning and transformed it into our deepest, most enduring hope for salvation.